The ceiling lights of Chicago Mercy Hospital blurred into long, agonizing streaks of fluorescent white as the gurney rattled beneath me. Every bump against the linoleum floor sent a jolt of lightning through my spine, but the real storm was raging inside my own chest. My heart felt like a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone, beating 180 times per minute. I could hear the nurses shouting numbers that sounded like a death sentence. 180 over 110. Preeclampsia. The word tasted like copper in my mouth. My body was shaking so violently that I could barely keep my teeth from shattering. I felt the cold press of a blood pressure cuff squeezing my arm until it went numb, a desperate attempt to measure the pressure that was threatening to stroke me out at 32 years old. As the doctors prepared the magnesium drip, my mind drifted back to the months leading up to this nightmare. I had sacrificed everything for the Windsor Legacy. I was the first one in the office at 6 a.m. and the last one to leave at midnight, reconciling the messy books of my family's real estate empire. I had worked through morning sickness and swollen ankles, thinking that if I just closed one more deal or caught one more accounting error, they would finally see me as more than just a tool. I wanted to prove that I belonged at the table, that I was a true Windsor. But as the oxygen mask was pressed over my face, the crushing truth hit me harder than the physical pain. I had built their throne with my own bones, yet here I was, facing the shadows alone. With trembling fingers, I reached for my phone on the side of the gurney. I opened the family group chat, the one titled The Windsor Legacy, in all capital letters. My vision was swimming, but I managed to type a desperate plea for help. I told them I was in the emergency room. I told them my blood pressure was skyrocketing and that the baby was coming 10 weeks early. I asked for their prayers for someone to come stand by my side because I was terrified. 30 seconds later, the phone buzzed. It was not a call. It was not a word of comfort. My Auntie Loretta had sent a photo. It was a high-definition selfie of her standing in a ballroom dripping with gold leaf and crystal chandeliers. She was wearing a designer gown that cost more than my entire yearly salary, holding a glass of vintage champagne with a smug grin. Her message underneath the photo was a jagged blade to my heart. She told me to stop buzzing her phone because she was standing next to the mayor at the church gala and did not want to be interrupted by my drama. I watched the little bubbles on the screen as the rest of my family read the message, but nobody said a word. The silence was louder than the sirens outside. Xavier entered this world not with a cry, but with a fragile, rhythmic gasping that haunted my very soul. He arrived at only 28 weeks, a tiny warrior weighing less than 3 pounds. When the nurses finally allowed me to see him in the neonatal intensive care unit, my heart did not just break, it shattered into a million jagged pieces. He was so small that he fit in the palm of a hand, his skin a translucent shade of bruised purple and blue. A web of wires and plastic tubes covered his miniature chest, tethering him to a world that seemed determined to reject him. The hum of the ventilator was the only lullaby he knew. Then came the words from the cardiologist that felt like a physical blow to my stomach. Xavier had a congenital heart defect. A valve was not closing, and his tiny, heroic heart was struggling to pump blood to his lungs. He was fighting for every single breath, a silent battle being waged behind a wall of thick plexiglass. I sat there in my thin hospital gown, feeling the cold draft of the room, and I reached for the only person I thought would understand the gravity of a mother's pain. I called my mother Matriarch Eloise. I let it ring until the line went dead. Then I called again and again. Each unanswered tone was a brick added to the wall of isolation surrounding me. I needed her strength, her wisdom, and the comfort of the woman who had raised me to be strong. But Eloise did not pick up. She did not send a text. She did not acknowledge the life of her grandson hanging by a literal thread. Instead, an hour later, a notification popped up on my screen from Facebook. My mother had just posted a gallery of photos from the church gala. There she was, the pillar of the community, standing center stage with a microphone in her hand and a saintly expression on her face. The caption spoke of her unwavering devotion to the mission of saving the poor children in Africa. She was smiling broadly, shaking hands with wealthy donors, and talking about the sanctity of life and the importance of protecting the vulnerable. The bitter irony was a poison that filled my throat. Matriarch Eloise was ready to mobilize an entire city to save children thousands of miles away, across an ocean, yet she would not even glance at her own flesh and blood gasping for air in a hospital only 15 minutes from her front door. To her charity was a costume she wore for applause, while her own family was nothing more than a footnote she chose to ignore. The hospital bill sat on my lap like a lead weight, bearing the cold reality that my son's life had a literal price tag: $50,000. That was the deposit required for the emergency heart surgery that would give Xavier a chance to see his first birthday. With no other options, and my pride stripped away by desperation, I drove to the glass and steel skyscraper that housed Windsor Enterprises. The air in the penthouse office was thick with the scent of expensive mahogany, and success a sharp contrast to the sterile smell of death and bleach I had been breathing for weeks. My brother Quentin sat behind a desk carved from a single piece of dark wood, leaning back in a leather chair that cost more than my car. He did not look up when I entered. He did not offer me a seat or ask how his nephew was doing. He simply stared at a digital ticker tape on his computer screen, watching the family fortune grow by the second. When I finally found my voice to ask for the money from the grandfather's trust fund, Quentin let out a long, weary sigh as if my presence was a tedious chore. He finally turned his chair, but his eyes refused to meet mine. He looked at the silk tie around his neck instead. He told me that he had discussed the matter with Mother. He said that Matriarch Eloise was right, and that the family had to be objective about these things. Then he uttered words that burned through my soul like acid. He said that Mother believed the child was a bad investment. He told me that according to the medical reports they had surreptitiously obtained, Xavier might not even live past 5 years old. He asked me why the family should pour $50,000 into a bottomless pit when that capital could be used to acquire a new apartment complex in the suburbs. I stood there trembling with a rage so pure it felt like ice in my veins. Before I could scream, Quentin slid a single sheet of legal paper across the desk. He told me there was a way to get the money, but it came with a condition. He offered me $50,000 in exchange for my signature on a document that would permanently waive my rights and the rights of my descendants to the grandfather's legacy trust. He wanted me to sell my son's future for his survival today. I looked into the cold, calculating eyes of my own brother and realized that there was no family left in this room. I was not standing before a sibling who shared my blood. I was standing before a group of heartless merchants who traded in human misery. They were not trying to help me, they were trying to liquidate me. Gemini NIDIYL NI Ho NHPHN Hi Hi S Hisin Cia Terence V PHP MUGT OBNT Ang Tu NTHT TCC CUCUK 2 TV Fong C JCA Bien. I walked out of Quentin's office with my head held high, though my heart was bleeding. When I returned to the hospital, I found Terence sitting in the hallway with his head in his hands. He did not ask what my brother had said because he already knew the answer. Terence stood up, took my hand, and looked me in the eyes with a quiet strength that the Windsors would never understand. Within 24 hours, he had sold his heavy-duty Ford truck, the very vehicle he used to earn a living for our family. He did not stop there. He took his gold wedding band and my diamond engagement ring to a pawn shop on the south side. We sat at the small kitchen table in our apartment, counting out every single dollar and cent, stacking crumpled $20 bills and loose change as if they were bars of gold. We were struggling to survive while my family watched from their ivory towers with utter contempt, whispering that we were embarrassing the family name with our poverty. Then the true betrayal revealed itself like a snake in the grass. While scrolling through social media during a late-night vigil at the hospital, I saw a link posted by my sister-in-law, Tiana. It was a GoFundMe campaign titled Saving Little Xavier. The cover photo was a high-resolution, heartbreaking image of my son inside his incubator, covered in tubes and fighting for his life. The description was filled with flowery religious language about the Windsor family's desperate struggle to save their youngest member. My breath caught in my throat when I saw the total amount raised, $325,000. The community, the church members, and even total strangers had opened their hearts and wallets to help my baby. I called Tiana immediately, my hands shaking with a mix of hope and fury. I asked her why she had not told me about the fund and when we could access the money to pay for Xavier's heart surgery. Tiana let out a soft, mocking laugh that made the hair on my neck stand up. She spoke to me as if I were a slow-witted child. Tiana told me that I was being incredibly selfish. She explained that the money was being used to maintain the Windsor public image and to fund an upcoming luxury vacation to the Maldives for Matriarch Eloise. She told me that Mother was exhausted and stressed from all the drama I had caused by having a premature baby. Tiana said that the family deserved a retreat after everything they had endured, and then she hung up the phone, leaving me standing in a silent hospital corridor with 325,000 reasons to destroy them all. They made a catastrophic mistake when they decided to discard me like a piece of broken furniture. They forgot who I actually am. For years, the Windsor family viewed me as nothing more than the quiet, bookish daughter who wore thick glasses and spent her weekends staring at spreadsheets. They treated me like a glorified clerk who was lucky to be given the privilege of managing the family books without receiving a single dollar of salary. They mistook my silence for submission and my diligence for dullness. But the truth was far more dangerous for them. I am Kenzia, a senior forensic auditor with a specialized certification in financial crimes. I am a woman trained to find the ghosts in the machine and the skeletons hidden behind the decimal points. While they were busy sipping champagne and planning their next vanity project, I was mastering the art of the paper trail. During those long, hollow nights in the hospital room next to Xavier, the blue light of my laptop was the only thing that kept me from falling into the abyss of despair. While my son fought for his life under the hum of the ventilator, I began my own war. I used my administrative credentials to bypass the surface-level layers of the Windsor Enterprises internal server. I went deeper than I ever had before digging into the encrypted folders and the offshore accounts that Quentin thought were invisible. What I found was not just sloppy bookkeeping, it was a masterpiece of criminal intent. I discovered massive financial black holes where millions of dollars had simply vanished. I tracked the movement of funds from the family real estate business into the church charity fund managed by Mother Eloise, only to see that money being laundered back into private accounts to pay for designer clothes and international travel. Every number I uncovered felt like a sharp knife being sharpened for the final strike. I found evidence of federal loan fraud where they had lied about their employee count to steal $600,000 in emergency government assistance. I found millions of dollars in unpaid taxes hidden behind a complex web of shell companies that had no physical address. My family was not just greedy, they were a criminal enterprise masquerading as a pillar of the community. As the sun began to rise over the Chicago skyline, I started packaging the evidence into encrypted files. I organized the bank statements, the forged signatures, and the fraudulent tax returns with the cold precision of an executioner. Each click of my mouse was a nail in the coffin of the Windsor Legacy. They thought they had left me with nothing, but they had actually given me the one thing I needed to destroy them. They gave me the time and the motive to perform the most thorough audit of their lives. The silence from my side was a weapon of its own, and I watched with grim satisfaction as the Windsor family began to unravel. Within 48 hours of my quiet investigation, the Internal Revenue Service had frozen several of their primary business accounts for a routine audit that was anything but routine. Panic spread through the family like a wildfire in a dry forest. My phone became a glowing coal in my hand, vibrating constantly with calls from Quentin, Tiana, and Auntie Loretta. They started with frantic demands, accusing me of negligence for not catching the errors sooner. Then the messages shifted to desperate pleas, offering me promotions and raises that were 3 years overdue. I did not answer a single one. I simply watched the screen light up and then fade to black over and over again. I wanted them to feel the suffocating weight of uncertainty the same way I felt when I was staring at my son through a glass box, with no way to pay for his survival. Finally, the Grand Matriarch herself decided to descend from her throne. My mother Eloise called me at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night. Her voice was as sweet and smooth as clover honey dripping with a maternal warmth that had been missing for decades. She called me her precious daughter. She told me that the family was facing a tiny, insignificant misunderstanding with some federal paperwork. She said that, as the head accountant, I was the only one who could fix it. Eloise promised me that if I would just come to the office and sign a few retroactive affidavits to clarify the internal transfers, the family would immediately release the $325,000 from the GoFundMe for Xavier's recovery. She spoke as if she were doing me a favor, offering to return the money they had stolen from my dying son in exchange for my soul and my professional license. It was a classic trap, a desperate attempt to make me an accomplice to their crimes. I stayed silent. I did not scream or cry or point out her hypocrisy. I simply hung up the phone and practiced the art of ghosting. While they were drowning in their own fear, I was busy making moves in the shadows. I reached out to 2 federal agents I had worked with on a previous corporate embezzlement case. We met in a dimly lit corner of a quiet diner far away from the hospital. I handed over the encrypted thumb drives containing every forged signature and every hidden offshore account. I was no longer interested in a settlement or an apology. I did not just want the money that belonged to my son. I wanted the complete and total destruction of the house of cards they had built on the backs of the vulnerable. I wanted justice that was as cold and uncompromising as the fluorescent lights in the neonatal unit. I was the auditor now, and it was time for the final reconciliation of the Windsor Legacy. The great Windsor Cathedral was a spectacle of blinding light and hollow opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings like frozen tears, casting a golden glow over the hundreds of guests dressed in silk and velvet. It was the night of the annual Heritage Gala, and the air was thick with the smell of expensive lilies and hypocrisy. My mother Eloise stood at the mahogany pulpit, bathed in a bright spotlight, as she prepared to accept the award for the most influential family of the year. She looked every bit the saintly matriarch in her white lace gown. With a practiced tremble in her lower lip, she reached into her clutch for a silk handkerchief and began to wipe away imaginary tears. She spoke into the gold-plated microphone about the heavy cross the Windsor family had been forced to carry. She told the weeping audience about her poor, sickly grandson who was fighting for his life and how the family had banded together with tireless strength and financial sacrifice to ensure his survival. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. A beautiful lie wrapped in the language of faith and devotion. The massive oak doors at the back of the cathedral creaked open, and the heavy thud of my heels on the marble floor cut through her speech like a gunshot. I did not walk in as the broken, grieving mother they expected me to be. I was not wearing the stained hospital scrubs or the look of defeat they had tried so hard to pin on me. I was clad in a sharp black power suit that fit like armor, my hair pulled back in a sleek, uncompromising bun. Beside me walked Terence, his shoulders broad and his gaze fixed forward with the intensity of a storm. The sea of faces turned toward us, and the whispers died instantly. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the room as we marched down the center aisle. The socialites leaned back in their pews, their eyes wide with confusion and shock. Quentin stepped down from the front row, his face twisting into a mask of panicked rage. He moved to intercept us before we reached the stage, his hands reaching out as if to physically shove me back into the shadows where he thought I belonged. He hissed at me to get out, accusing me of trying to embarrass the family during their most sacred moment. He whispered that if I left quietly, he might still consider helping with the hospital bills. I did not stop walking. I did not even flinch. I looked my brother directly in his cold, cowardly eyes and let a slow, predatory smile spread across my face. I told him quite clearly that he should calm down because I was not there to beg for a single cent of their blood money. I told the entire room that I had not come to ask for anything at all. I told them that I had simply come to deliver a very special gift to my mother in honor of her legacy. The lights dimmed for the scheduled tribute video, but the screen did not show images of the Windsor family's charitable deeds. Instead, A cold clinical spreadsheet flickered into view, followed by high-resolution scans of bank statements from offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. The audience gasped as private emails between Tiana and Quentin appeared detailing exactly how they had redirected $325,000 from my son's medical fund to pay for a private villa in the Maldives. The evidence of tax evasion and federal loan fraud scrolled past like a digital executioner's list. The air in the cathedral turned frigid as the prestigious guests realized they were not witnesses to a celebration, but to a televised confession of a criminal empire. Before Eloise could even scream for the technicians to kill the power, the heavy doors at the side of the altar swung open. 12 agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Department of the Treasury stepped into the light, their tactical vests standing out in sharp contrast against the gold leaf decor. One agent walked directly to the pulpit and showed Eloise a federal arrest warrant. My mother, the great matriarch who always held her head so high, collapsed onto the velvet carpet like a puppet with its strings cut. Quentin tried to scramble toward the back exit, but he was intercepted by 2 agents who forced his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the silent cathedral, a sound more final than any judge's gavel. Tiana was sobbing, her designer gown fluttering as she was led away in silver restraints in front of the very elite community she had tried so hard to impress. I walked up to the edge of the stage and looked down at my mother. She looked small, withered, and stripped of the lies that had sustained her. I looked her in the eyes one last time, feeling no hatred, only a profound sense of closure. I told her that she was wrong when she said Xavier was a bad investment. I told her that my son was a miracle and a warrior. Then I whispered that her own cruelty was the real debt, a staggering mountain of interest that she would never be able to pay back in this lifetime. I turned my back on them and walked out of the cathedral into the fresh night air. Xavier's recovery was nothing short of miraculous, as if the removal of the toxic Windsor influence had allowed his tiny heart to finally heal. The surgery was a success, and he is now a thriving toddler with a laugh that fills our home with light. I did not return to the corporate world of luxury real estate. Instead, I opened my own firm dedicated to forensic auditing for the marginalized. I use my skills to protect the elderly and the vulnerable who have been betrayed by their own families, ensuring that no one else has to fight the monsters alone. I realize that while blood makes you related, only loyalty and love make you family. Family is not always the blood that flows through your veins, but the hands that hold you when you are at your weakest. Betrayal from those who should love us most is a searing fire, but it can also be the forge that turns our softest parts into unbreakable steel. Your worth is never defined by someone else's inability to see your value, especially if they are looking through the lens of greed. When you stand in your truth and use your God-given talents for justice, you transform from a victim into a victor. Remember, peace is a luxury you must sometimes fight for by letting go of what is toxic.